Donnellys ride, their killers by their side.
The conflict between the Black Donnelly and the member of Biddle Township went down in the history of Canada as one of the greatest mysterious and feuds. The Donnelly name instantly became associated with trouble when two heads of the family, James and Johanna Donnelly, moved from Tipperary, Ireland to Canada in the early 1840s. On February 4, 1880s, 5 of the Donnelly family members were massacred in their house by a mob made up of the town member, and even with the two confessions in the court, no one was found guilty and leave it a cold case.
Came the sound of shovels digging your grave.
Jim and Johanna Donnelly were originally from Tipperary, Ireland, but moved to Canada in hope of a better future. Jim had his first move on his own in 1842, but joined by his wife Johanna and their son James Jr. in 1844. They had their first move to London, Canada, where the second son William was born with a deformed foot. But they didn't stay there for long. James wanted his own land to farm, so they moved to Biddle. When James, Johanna, and James Jr. settled on the land that wasn't their own, they started a feud with the rest of the town without even knowing it. The 100 acres of the land James chose to settle on belonged to the absentee landlord, Mr. John Grace. James and his wife Johanna began to clear the land in fall of the same year. They have another son named him John. Over the next few years, they have 5 more children: Patrick, Michael, Robert, Thomas, and one daughter, Ginny. The family of 10 lived happily on the stolen land until 1855. Mr. John Grace sold 50 acres to Michael Minher. James was furious after working so hard to clear the properties. There was no way he was going to give up. He dared anyone to try to take the 50 acres of the land away from him. No one did, but except for Patrick Farrell. Patrick rented the land for Michael Minher, but when he did went to the land claim on the land, James was there already to fight for it. When they went to the court, is the result James keeping the northern 50 acres of the land, but he would have to give up the southern half.
The Donnellys created many kinds of conflict during their time in Biddle. One of the biggest being a very old custom in Ontario called bees, a neighborhood get-together to help each other with any task. That night it was William's logging bee, and as usual there was a lot of drinking involved. There are many different accounts on how that night played out, so no one may ever know who had started the fight, but the end results were the same. Patrick dead by James' hand. By law, James was now a murderer. Soon after, a warrant was issued for his arrest, but he was nowhere to be found. For the next 11 months, no one knew where he had gone, except for his wife Joanna and James Jr., who is now 15, William, aged 12, and 10-year-old John. Every so often, neighbors caught glimpses of James disguised in his wife's clothing, working on the fields. They knew it was James, they didn't say, and James continued that way until winter had fallen. Then he stayed in the stables and any friends' houses who were willing to risk their freedom in order to help him. May 1858, close to the anniversary of Patrick Farrell's murder, James turned himself in, after getting advice from his closest friends, including Jim Hodgins, a Peace Society member. The trial was held in Goderich, and even with one of the best criminal lawyers in the province, he was found guilty, and the sentence was death by hanging. The execution was set for September 17, 1858. Joanna was devastated, but she wasn't going to sit back and let her husband die. Instead, she petitioned for a less severe sentence. By July of that year, all of her petitioning paid off. James's death sentence was changed to a lighter penalty of 7 years in prison. He left prison on August 16th, and the prison closed also. When James returned, he found his boys had grown into men. While he was gone, the Donnelly boys had gained the title Town Fighters. They also gained a reputation as thieves. Tools and supplies went missing from neighboring farms all the time. Sometimes barns were lit on fire, cattle poisoned, and horses mutilated. Few were brave enough to confront the Donnellys. One farmer, Bob McLean, even tried to press charges against the Donnellys, suspecting they stole tools from him. Soon after, his barn was burnt down, cattle poisoned, and horses were killed. When James returned home in 1865, he came home to the toughest and most feared family in the county.
Back in 1840 some...
On February 4th, 1880, James, his wife Joanna, their sons John and Tom, and their niece Bridget were all murdered in their house, which was burned down after. They were murdered by a group of members from the Biddle Peace Society. Johnny O'Connor, a young farmhand, had witnessed the murder and later testified in court on what had happened. Johnny claimed that the morning of the 4th he woke to James Sr. getting dressed, and James Carroll, the head of Biddle Peace Society, was in the kitchen. They learned that Tom Donnelly was out front, handcuffed and surrounded by a group of men. That's when 20 men barged into the kitchen, carrying clubs and spades. They attacked James and Johanna. Tom, who was quicker, instead tried to escape. He ran outside while still handcuffed. Several of the men chased after him. A few minutes later, the men returned and threw a beaten-up Tom onto the floor. Johnny recalled someone saying, quote, "Hit the fellow on the head and break his skull open," unquote. One of the members of the Peace Society did just so. Several men ran upstairs and kicked open the door to where Bridget, the niece of James and Johanna, was staying and murdered her. They then covered the bed that Johnny, who had witnessed everything, was hiding under with coal, oil, and they lit the house on fire. They also set on fire the farmhouse. The townspeople moved on, not finished with their mission. Johnny fled from the burning house. None of the men had known he was there. A little later, the mob arrived at the house of one of the sons, Will. It was around 2:30 a.m. Will, his wife, his brother John, and a family friend were asleep. They heard shots of fire from outside, so John Donnelly went to the door. When he opened it, he was shot twice, through his chest and his pelvis. The mob left, thinking they had murdered Will. James had been 64, Johanna 60, John 43, Tom 25, and Bridget 21 when they were all murdered. There were two eyewitnesses of their massacre, Johnny O'Connor and William Donnelly. They had claimed to have identified 6 of the murderers, who were soon brought to trial in nearby London. The local police had arrested most, if not all of them. However, the prisoners would prefer to, quote, "swing rather than turn state's evidence," unquote. The case gained a lot of international attention when it got out that the murders were the result of a long-lasting feud between a family and the town. They held 2 trials for the 6 accused men. These trials were meant to act as a compromise for the remaining Donnelly family members, which failed as no one was held responsible. At the first trial, September 1880, the jury disagreed on the matter. At the second one, January 1881, the jury found the 6 men not guilty, despite Johnny and William's 2 eyewitness accounts and the confessions of 2 of the accused murderers. Part of the reason for this was because the jury had decided that Johnny O'Connor's testimony was unreliable due to him being 12 at the time of the massacre. After the trial, the Murdy Funeral Home was put in charge of the family's burial, with the wake being held by Johnny's father, Michael O'Connor. In 1889, Bob Donnelly placed a massive tombstone in St. Patrick to mark the family's resting place. After this, the remaining family in town tried to move on with their lives.
The Donnelly Massacre is often described as Canada's greatest mystery. The original tombstone was removed after 75 years due to unwanted attention and vandalism from tourists. The family's descendants later raised a new tombstone without the word murdered under the names of the deceased. The story of the Black Donnellys has remained in people's memories because of its lasting status as a cold case, and the Lucan town today has chosen to take the Donnelly story and remembering it as part of their heritage and lasting folklore. The Donnellys themselves were a notorious family, no doubt remembered by the people they met and argued with. In the time since their death, the Donnelly story has captivated the minds and imaginations of people. Books and plays and songs have been written about them, some based on facts and some more fictional. Some of the most popularly known writings on the Donnellys were The Donnellys Must Die by Arlo Miller, The Donnellys a Trilogy, playwright by James Reaney, and The Black Donnellys by Thomas Kelly. It has also been carried into local folklore of the ghostly victims walking around the Roman line. The reason the Donnelly tragedy is so important is because it represents every murder that was never solved. It shows the injustice in the justice system. Terrible actions like the massacre of the Black Donnellys should never be forgotten or ignored. It brings to light how even back in the 1880s, violence was used as a solution to problems, when it never should have been. How humanity has been at a point where violence is chosen to be the answer, and it has been this way for much longer than we would have thought, and much longer than it should be.